What if I told you that everything you believed while watching historical films is a complete lie? Yes, we're used to romanticizing old England, lavish balls, elegant tea parties, gallant gentlemen, and the opulent aesthetics of shows like Bridgerton or Pride and Prejudice. But today, we're going to tear off the pretty masks from this era. I delved into real historical archives and found facts that will literally send chills down your spine. Imagine this nightmare. You're no longer a lady, but you're not just a cook either. The lives of these young women turned into an endless, agonizing struggle between the icy contempt of arrogant aristocrats and the deep-seated hatred of the rest of the household staff. They were complete outsiders to absolutely everyone. Be sure to watch this video all the way to the end, and you'll learn how the seemingly prestigious position of governess gradually eroded human dignity, step by step. And somewhere in the middle of the video, I'll share a shocking story from a governess's personal diary, one that's simply impossible to believe. Why did these domestic workers become powerless shadows in the wealthiest homes of the era? Get comfortable, grab some snacks, hit like in advance, subscribe to the channel, and let's get started. Are you ready to learn the truth about how a brilliant education became a ticket to social ostracism? This story isn't a list of individual tragic fates, but rather a fluid narrative about an entire class of women who found themselves in a hopeless situation. In the Victorian era, a father's bankruptcy or the loss of a breadwinner instantly robbed a middle-class young woman of all her prospects in life. Strict social norms forbade a true lady from engaging in manual labor or commerce, leaving her with only one respectable means of earning a living. The position of a governess seemed to be the only salvation from poverty, but in reality, it turned out to be an extremely cruel trap. She crossed the threshold of the vast estate, carrying a portfolio filled with sheet music, books, and letters of recommendation. She was hired for her excellent command of French, her ability to play the piano, and her knowledge of the subtleties of high society etiquette. However, this very high intellectual level became the main reason for her isolation within her new, vast home. The mistress of the mansion saw her solely as a hired servant, to be paid a salary, not as an equal conversational partner. From the very first day, an invisible wall was erected, forever cutting the new arrival off from her usual social circle. Such a servant's salary was negligible compared to the wealthy family's expenses on everyday entertainment. This modest sum was barely enough to purchase the plain, dark dresses required to maintain the governess's respectable appearance. The lack of sufficient personal funds deprived the young woman of the opportunity to go into town, attend the theatre, or buy new books for her own enjoyment. She was forced to save every penny she earned, anxiously thinking about the time when her services would no longer be needed. Her financial dependence made her completely submissive to any, even the most unjust, demands and whims of her high-ranking employers. Even routine visits from relatives or old friends were strictly forbidden in most aristocratic residences. The owners had absolutely no desire to see outsiders of dubious social standing on the grounds of their private estates. Therefore, the girl's only connection to the outside world was the rare letters she wrote by the dim light of a candle late at night. In them, she described in detail her anxieties and all-encompassing loneliness, trying not to upset her loved ones with the details of her daily humiliations. Gradually, her former social ties were irrevocably severed, leaving her alone to face the harsh reality of a closed aristocratic world. What made this situation particularly cruel was the obvious fact that the governess came from the same social background as her employers. She read the same philosophical treatises, had a keen understanding of the subtleties of art, and possessed the same refined social manners. However, Victorian society judged people solely by the size of their bank accounts and the extent of their land holdings. Having lost her financial foundation, the young woman was instantly struck from the lists of respectable acquaintances and reduced to a powerless member of the domestic staff. This constant, bitter awareness of her own lost life methodically poisoned every day of her stay in the luxurious mansion. The very atmosphere of the vast aristocratic house constantly underscored the insurmountable chasm between wealth and absolute dependence. The rustle of the mistress's expensive silk dresses stood in stark contrast to the modest woolen clothes of the educated domestic worker. The clinking of crystal glasses from the main dining room carried up to the distant upper floors like an echo of someone else's celebration of life, one that was utterly out of reach. The girl could only silently observe this splendor from the sidelines, remaining an invisible spectator in the grand theater of someone else's prosperity. Her youth and natural beauty were rapidly fading amid endless stacks of school notebooks and dusty geography maps. This strict isolation gave rise to a unique social stratum that is rarely mentioned in official historical accounts. Their real everyday life was an endless struggle to preserve their dignity under the contemptuous glances of high-ranking employers. Every new position they secured became yet another grueling test of resilience within this extremely unjust social system. We'd love to hear your thoughts on the complex fate of these educated women, so please share your views in the comments. Be sure to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on new in-depth historical investigations and unique facts. Want to learn a secret that will change your understanding of the inner workings of Victorian mansions? The relationship between the lady of the house and the governess she hired was always built on a foundation of carefully concealed hostility. The lady of the manor understood perfectly well that this modestly dressed young woman surpassed her in knowledge, erudition, and often in talent. This intellectual superiority provoked a deep-seated irritation which manifested as constant nitpicking over the quality of the work performed. Every order was given in a deliberately cold tone, intended to remind the governess of the insurmountable financial gap between the two women. The employer masterfully used the tools of social etiquette to suppress the will of her educated employee on a daily basis. During a chance encounter in the hallway, the mistress might simply walk past without responding to her mentor's polite curtsy. During rare audiences in the main parlor, the young woman was not offered a seat, forcing her to listen to instructions while standing. Any attempts to strike up small talk or discuss a book she had read were immediately cut short by haughty silence. In this way, an invisible but utterly insurmountable wall was erected, precluding even the slightest possibility of human connection. This social divide was particularly evident during Sunday visits to the local parish church. The employer's family occupied the best seats in the front row, displaying their high status to all the neighbors in attendance. The governess followed them at a respectful distance, taking a modest seat in the back, along with the rest of the domestic staff. She was not permitted to use her employer's carriage, so she was forced to walk to church in all kinds of weather. Even in the face of eternity, Victorian society strictly adhered to its artificial class hierarchy, making no exceptions for anyone. The master of the mansion, as a rule, did not even notice the presence of the educated housekeeper in his enormous home. For a Victorian gentleman, matters of domestic upbringing fell exclusively within the purview of his lawful wife. If he happened to encounter the governess in the hallways, he treated her with polite but utterly detached indifference. Any display of interest on his part would immediately arouse the mistress's suspicion and anger, which threatened catastrophic consequences. Therefore, men preferred to simply ignore the existence of an intelligent and well-read woman on their own property. Financial settlements with employers were also treated as an extremely humiliating and perfunctory procedure. Salaries were paid irregularly, often late, which placed the young woman in an even more dependent and vulnerable position. She had to delicately remind them of payment deadlines, only to be met with the lady of the house's discontented sighs. A request for a raise or improved living conditions was regarded as unheard of audacity and ingratitude. As a result, most governesses preferred to silently endure their hardships rather than lose their sole source of livelihood. This system of relations was carefully designed to perpetuate social inequality. Education and good manners, which in any other situation would have earned a young woman respect, were turned against her here. The lady of the house deliberately undermined her servants' self-esteem. turning her into a submissive tool for educating the younger generation. The power of money and titles proved its absolute superiority over intelligence, talent, and innate nobility. The illusion of justice crumbled at the very first clash with the harsh reality of aristocratic arrogance. The governess was expected to remain an invisible shadow, deprived of the right to her own emotions, opinions, and desires. Do you agree that this kind of constant psychological pressure was more terrifying than open aggression? In the next chapter, you'll learn the soul-chilling truth about why even an ordinary cook looked upon the educated lady with outright contempt. What I am about to reveal is a topic that is off-limits in classic novels set in the glorious Victorian era. While the gentlemen rejected the governess because of a lack of funds, the servants hated her for belonging to a different class. In the strict hierarchy of domestic staff, the governess occupied a completely baffling, intermediate position that annoyed absolutely everyone. She was not a lady capable of giving orders and handing out generous tips, yet she was not the equal of a simple maid either. This social ambiguity made her the prime target for veiled mockery and petty sabotage from the entire household staff. In the kitchen, she was treated with no less coldness and calculated indifference. The head chef would send the cold leftovers from lunch to the schoolroom, reserving the best cuts for the master's table and the privileged servants. If the girl tried to ask for a cup of hot tea outside of the established schedule, she was met with a wall of indignation. The kitchen hierarchy was incredibly rigid, and there was no room in it for indulging the whims of a penniless intellectual. Breakfasts and dinners turned into a joyless consumption of tasteless food in the solitude of her study. She was completely unable to form friendships with any of the inhabitants of the vast estate. To converse with the servants as an equal meant to permanently lose what remained of her aristocratic dignity and respect. Keeping her distance meant condemning herself to years of complete silence and social isolation among dozens of people. She lived on an island of loneliness, surrounded by a sea of hostility where every glance harbored ill will. Her only companions were the pages of old books and the notebooks of her charges, which could never replace genuine human interaction. The servants often held their own celebrations and parties in the common areas on the lower floors of the enormous building. From there came the sounds of cheerful music, loud laughter, and the clinking of glasses, evidence of a vibrant social life. Such a life required tremendous inner strength, which could be found only in a sense of self-respect. The girls from good families clung to their knowledge and upbringing as if they were a lifeline in a raging ocean of hostility. They held their heads high as they walked past the whispering kitchen maids and carried their school bags with textbooks with perfect posture. This quiet resistance to ignorance and malice formed the foundation of their heroic daily existence. They remained true ladies even under the most humiliating living conditions, preserving the purity of their thoughts and the nobility of their manners. This double alienation made life in the mansion an unbearably lonely ordeal for any educated young woman. She could find no one to talk to, neither in the luxurious drawing rooms nor in the noisy, crowded hallways of the servants' quarters. Every day brought only new evidence of her utter uselessness outside the study assigned to her. If you appreciate this detailed analysis of the hidden social conflicts of the Victorian era, please support this video. Please like this video so that we can continue to uncover the harsh historical secrets of the past. Are you ready for the shocking truth about how hearts were broken within the cold walls of Victorian mansions? Young heirs to wealthy families were often deeply impressed by the wit and refinement of their new governesses. Young men, returning home from boarding schools for the holidays, would suddenly discover a charming conversationalist in their own home. Her modesty, education, and melancholic gaze created an aura of mysterious romance around her that captivated young minds. Secret sighs began, along with chance encounters in the library and attempts to strike up long conversations about art and poetry. For a lonely young woman, deprived of normal human interaction, such attention became a dangerous temptation. The sincere interest shown by a young aristocrat was easily mistaken for the beginning of a great and pure love. In a harsh world of constant humiliation, these brief conversations seemed like rays of sunlight breaking through leaden clouds. She began to believe that her intellect and inner qualities were capable of overcoming insurmountable class barriers. Romantic illusions, fueled by the French novels she had read, obscured the harsh reality of Victorian class society. The young men were genuinely smitten. They delivered impassioned speeches and swore eternal devotion to their beautiful beloved. They promised to defy the will of their despotic parents, renounce their inheritance, and build a life based on true feelings. The most devastating disappointment came from the behavior of the young knight himself at the height of an open family scandal. Faced with the real threat of losing his financial support and social standing, the young man would quickly back down. Yesterday's vows were instantly forgotten, and the passionate lover turned into a submissive son, compliant with the will of his domineering parents. He averted his gaze, avoided meetings, and made not the slightest attempt to defend the honor of the young woman who had believed his words. This betrayal inflicted a deep emotional wound that would not heal for many long years. Left without a job, without references, and with a broken heart, the young woman found herself on the very brink of ruin. Society did not forgive such audacity, branding the victim as a dangerous gold digger and a scandal monger. Finding a new position in a respectable household after such accusations was a nearly impossible task for a single woman. The shattering of these romantic illusions was the most painful blow for a young woman isolated from the world. Young heirs quickly forgot their fleeting infatuations, easily turning their attention to brides from high society who were a suitable match in status. Yesterday's vows of eternal devotion were replaced by cold nods during chance encounters in the spacious corridors of the vast estate. Do you think such a relationship could ever have ended in a happy marriage under the harsh conditions of that time? In the next chapter, you'll learn how the endless hours of solitude passed as the mansion's grand halls filled with the sounds of the waltz. Whenever a grand reception or ball was planned at the vast mansion, the life of the private tutor would come to a standstill in absolute silence. The entire house would spring into action. Servants polished the silverware, and hundreds of fresh flowers and candelabras were brought into the halls. The air was filled with the aromas of exquisite dishes, expensive perfumes, and the anticipation of a grand social event. However, for the woman living on the upper floors, this celebration meant only additional hours of strict and hopeless seclusion. She was strictly forbidden to leave her rooms, lest she accidentally catch the eye of the arriving distinguished guests. In the evening, when luxurious carriages began to gather at the main entrance, she could do nothing but stand by the closed window. Through the fogged-up glass, she watched the ladies in magnificent silk gowns adorned with sparkling diamonds. She saw gentlemen in tailcoats gallantly offering their arms to their companions on the illuminated steps of the grand entrance. This glittering world, to which she had once belonged by birthright, now seemed to her like a theatrical production. An invisible barrier separated her from that life more securely than the strongest iron bars of a prison cell. She tried to distract herself from her oppressive thoughts by immersing herself in serious literature or correcting her students' notebooks. However, it was incredibly difficult to concentrate on French grammar amid the rhythmic clacking of heels from the ballroom. The lines blurred before her eyes, and her thoughts inevitably returned to the injustice of the world's order. She reread the pages of old books, trying to find in Stoic philosophy the comfort and strength to continue on her path. But philosophical treatises did little to help her cope with the simple human longing for joy and warm companionship. Sleep was slow to come on such festive nights, leaving her alone with her own fears and anxieties. The noise of departing carriages, loud farewells, and the laughter of guests continued until the very early, grey morning. When the house finally fell silent, it was time to get up and prepare for another workday. The tutor had to appear before her pupils refreshed, composed, and ready to teach challenging geography lessons. No one cut her any slack for the sleepless night she'd spent in an icy room amid the sounds of someone else's celebration. The morning after the ball, the house looked like a battlefield, strewn with crumpled ribbons, wilted flowers, and half-empty glasses. Servants wandered wearily through the corridors, tidying up the luxurious living rooms and grand dining rooms that had been turned upside down. Against the backdrop of this general exhaustion, the governess was expected to demonstrate perfect discipline and efficiency. She gathered the younger generation in the study, her stern voice steering their thoughts away from festive sweets and back to mathematics. This was her moment of small triumph, when she alone maintained order amid the chaos of the grand estate. These contrasts between celebration and routine shaped a deeply philosophical view of the transience of all life's joys. Life outside the festivities became a metaphor for their existence within the Victorian social order. They were part of the system, yet forever excluded from its principal benefits. Every solemn musical phrase, drifting up from below, only reinforced this unjust and harsh order. Their lot was to contemplate the glamour of others, forever remaining in the deep social shadows. This fate demanded incredible fortitude, which deserves no less respect than the feats of soldiers on the front lines. Guess what happened next when literature attempted to describe the fate of these lonely women? The publication of Charlotte Bronte's novel, Jane Eyre, had the effect of a bombshell in tranquil Victorian society. Readers were stunned by the story of a poor governess who managed to win the heart of the stern, wealthy owner of a vast estate. The book gave hope to thousands of disenfranchised working women, making them believe in the possibility of a happy ending to their own stories. However, this literary fiction had very little in common with the real, everyday lives of educated ladies of that time. Comparing this novel with actual diary entries from those years reveals a stark chasm between dream and reality. In the real memoirs, we find neither mysterious attics, nor enigmatic fires, nor romantic, intellectual landlords. The pages of the actual notebooks are filled with dry lists of expenses, class schedules, and complaints about the unbearable cold in the rooms. A smooth narrative about this social class shows that their daily lives consisted of monotonous routines, not Gothic adventures. A real governess would never have dared to talk back to her employer, as the famous fictional heroine did. The only thing the novel got absolutely right was its description of the all-consuming feeling of social isolation. Real-life governesses, like the fictional heroine, keenly felt their intellectual isolation among ignorant servants and arrogant masters. They confided their tears only to the pages of their personal diaries, carefully hiding them at the bottom of their travel trunks. These yellowed pages hold a true story of suffering, written without literary embellishments or happy endings. The entries are filled with bitter reflections on the injustice of a world where intelligence and honesty are worth nothing without a bank account. Many female employers reacted extremely negatively to the novel's publication, considering it dangerous and subversive to the foundations of society. They feared that the book would instill absurd hopes in their domestic workers and cause them to forget their subordinate status. In some households, reading Charlotte Bronte's work was officially banned under threat of immediate dismissal for any offender. Mistresses did not want romantic rebels by their side. They needed only quiet and obedient tools for training. The author's literary triumph resulted in additional hardships for the real-life practitioners of this difficult profession. Despite all the bans, the book was secretly passed from hand to hand, becoming a kind of manifesto for educated women. They read it by the light of dying candles, finding in the heroine's strong character a source of inspiration for their own struggles. However, upon closing the final page, they were forced to return once again to the world of cold classrooms and haughty glances. The book offered temporary solace, but it could not change the harsh laws of the Victorian economic and social system. The only true salvation lay in persistent daily labour and the preservation of inner human dignity. Today, these authentic historical documents are of immense value for understanding the true status of women in the 19th century. They prove that true heroism lay not in romantic escapes, but in the ability to bear one's cross for decades. These women survived thanks to incredible self-discipline, giving up illusions in order to preserve their independence. Their stories, devoid of Gothic glamour, are striking in their realism and quiet, everyday resilience in the face of adversity. The diaries have become a memorial to those who built the future of other people's families while having no right to a future of their own. These published memoirs shatter the literary myth, laying bare the dry and joyless routine of a governess. Instead of mysterious estate owners and Gothic mysteries, they faced only strict schedules and endless tests of their pupils' knowledge. Reality left no room for miraculous rescues, offering only years of grueling intellectual and psychological labor. Did these women have even the slightest right to express their own feelings within such a strict system? In the next chapter, you'll learn how the very architecture of Victorian mansions was designed to emphasize social isolation.
And my heart aches.
The hidden system of oppression in the Victorian era began not with words, but with the very design of buildings. The layout of vast estates was meticulously planned by architects to strictly divide the space into zones for the masters and the servants. The governess occupied a completely unique, isolated position within this complex spatial matrix. The classrooms and bedrooms of the younger generation were always located in a separate wing or on the top floor of the building. This was done so that the noise from lessons would not disturb the peace of the ladies and gentlemen in the formal drawing rooms. To reach her modest room, the young woman had to use special black staircases hidden from prying eyes. These narrow, dark and steep steps ran through the thickness of the walls, far from the spacious, light-filled main hallways. As she moved through these hidden arteries of the house, she felt like a shadow, unworthy of treading on the soft carpets. The architecture literally forced her to physically feel her low status every time she went downstairs for breakfast. The building itself became a stern overseer, monitoring every step of the hired servant. The estate's library, a place that could have been the chief solace for an educated lady, was often off-limits to her. She was allowed to enter only to retrieve study materials or with the express permission of the owner of the luxurious house. Lingering among the tall oak bookshelves lined with leather-bound volumes was considered an unpardonable audacity for a humble servant. She was permitted to take only educational books, excluding contemporary novels or poetry collections. Thus, even the intellectual space of the house was strictly regulated and divided by class barriers.
Yes, ma'am.
The formal garden and the extensive park grounds were also divided by invisible yet strict lines of social restrictions. The young woman was allowed to walk with her charges only along specially designated paths, far from the main viewing terraces. If the owners or their high-ranking guests were coming toward her on the path, the governess had to immediately turn onto a side path. This constant need to give way, hide, and disappear eroded her sense of self-worth more effectively than any words could. The park's grounds became a labyrinth where every misstep could lead to a major scandal and dismissal. Even the windows in the rooms were arranged according to a person's position in the estate's strict social hierarchy. The grand halls on the first floor overlooked magnificent, well-manicured lawns, fountains, and distant picturesque hills. The windows of the servants' quarters and classrooms looked out onto service courtyards, stables, or blank walls. A female servant was deprived of the opportunity to enjoy the beauty of nature, locked away in the visual isolation of the architectural design. The view from her window was a constant reminder that beauty and open spaces belonged exclusively to the rightful owners of the land. This spatial segregation had a colossal impact on the psyche of women, forced to live for years under such harsh conditions. They grew accustomed to moving silently, taking up as little space as possible, and trying not to attract even the slightest attention from those around them. Their gait became uncertain and their gestures stiff, reflecting their constant presence within a foreign and hostile architectural space. The buildings shaped their behavior, transforming people who were naturally free into submissive, functional elements of a vast domestic machine. The only way to break free from this architectural captivity was to completely renounce one's modest position. Thus, physical space became the aristocracy's chief ally in keeping hired workers in their places. Isolation within the walls of the classroom created a closed-off world full of austerity, coldness, and endless intellectual exercises. The architecture of solitude brilliantly fulfilled its purpose, depriving the girls of even the illusion of belonging to a glamorous social life. They remained captives of brick walls, their well-being dependent on the financial ambitions of others. This system was perfect in its cold and calculated spatial cruelty. The greatest tragedy for an intelligent and well-read woman was not the lack of money, but the acute shortage of intellectual stimulation. Having received an excellent education, she was accustomed to analyzing historical events, discussing philosophy, and taking an interest in the scientific discoveries of her time. However, within the walls of an aristocratic mansion, her brilliant mind found itself completely unchallenged beyond the simplest educational programs. For years, she had to repeat the basic rules of French grammar and list the capitals of countries for her board charges. Deprived of complex intellectual work, her mind began to suffer from an information starvation comparable to physical exhaustion. Her only outlet was writing long letters to her former boarding school classmates or to the few relatives she had left. In these letters, she could freely express her thoughts, discuss literature, and maintain the illusion of an intellectual life. However, mail arrived rarely, and replies were often brief due to the high cost of postage in those harsh historical times. Correspondence could not fully replace a live conversation partner capable of appreciating subtle irony or engaging in a complex philosophical discussion. Over time, even these tenuous threads were severed, plunging the tutor into absolute, hopeless silence. Attempts to find a conversation partner among the local clergy or doctors who visited the mansion were also doomed to complete and utter failure. The owners strictly ensured that their maid did not engage in inappropriate conversations with respected professionals. Any interest shown in complex topics was regarded as a lack of the modesty required of a respectable Victorian young woman.
Is someone there?
Men preferred to discuss serious matters exclusively with their peers, ignoring the presence of an intelligent woman in the corner of the room. Her lot in life was to listen silently to others' discussions, without the right to contribute a single meaningful word. This constant suppression of her own abilities led to the development of deep melancholy and a loss of all interest in life. A mind that could have contributed to the advancement of science or literature was squandered on correcting crooked letters in school handwriting exercises. The young women were aware of the extent of their unfulfilled potential, which led to bouts of quiet despair, hidden from prying eyes. They understood that their potential was forever walled up within the brick walls of this luxurious but incredibly stifling gilded cage. Society was squandering its finest intellectual resource, sacrificing it to outdated class prejudices. Some of them tried to write poems or short essays in secret from their strict and suspicious employers. They hid their written pages under mattresses or among old maps, fearing that their maids might accidentally discover their work. These texts rarely displayed literary perfection, but they were the cry of a soul trapped in the grip of social conventions. Most of these manuscripts were lost forever or burned by the authors themselves in moments of deepest depression and despair. History has been deprived of hundreds of potential women writers whose talents were crushed by the weight of the Victorian class system. This tragedy of unfulfilled intellect is one of the saddest chapters in the history of educated women of the 19th century. They were the first to gain access to serious knowledge, but society was not ready to accept them as equals. Their brilliant education became not a ticket to a better life, but heavy shackles chaining them to classrooms that were not their own. The intellectual starvation within a gilded cage proved to be a trial more difficult to endure than a mere lack of money. This chapter of history teaches us how important it is to value freedom of thought and the opportunity for open human interaction. The most dreaded stage in a governess's life came when her pupils grew up and no longer needed lessons. In Victorian England, there was no pension system or government guarantees for intellectual workers. As soon as the younger generation left for university or got married, the services of an educated lady became completely unnecessary. The owners of the mansion would coldly thank her for her many years of service, pay her final salary, and show her the door for good. Years of devotion to the family did not entitle her to any further financial support from her wealthy employers. For a woman who had turned 40 or 50, finding a new job in a respectable household was practically impossible. Aristocrats preferred to hire young, energetic young women, capable of enduring long walks and meeting the strict demands of the new era. An aging lady with greying hair and failing eyesight did not fit the image of the ideal Victorian governess. Her experience and deep knowledge no longer interested anyone in a market saturated with cheap intellectual labour. Society ruthlessly cast aside those who had devoted the best years of their lives to serving the aristocratic interests of others. The savings she had managed to accumulate over the years were negligible due to her extremely low starting salary. That money was barely enough to rent the cheapest room in the poor, windswept neighbourhoods of grey London. Deprived of free meals and a roof over her head, she was rapidly sinking into the abyss of desperate, humiliating poverty. She had to scrimp on food, firewood, and medicine, slowly wasting away in the cold solitude of her cramped, rented room. The fear of tomorrow, which had haunted her all her life, was now becoming a harsh and merciless reality. Many of them tried to earn a living by giving private lessons or doing translations, but competition in the capital was incredibly fierce. The pay for such services was meagre, and with each passing year, they had less and less energy left to search for new students. Those who retained some vision took up the grueling work of sewing or embroidery, labouring by the dim light of a candle through the long nights. Pride prevented them from begging for alms on the streets, so they preferred to starve to death in the silence of their rooms. This quiet passing of former intellectuals stood in stark contrast to the boisterous, grand funerals of their once wealthy employers. Relatives, if they were still alive, were extremely rarely able to provide substantial assistance to an impoverished old maid. More often than not, they themselves were barely making ends meet and did not wish to burden their families with unnecessary expenses. Her former students, whom she had once taught to read and write, quickly forgot about the existence of their strict mentor. Preoccupied with social gatherings, political careers, and the accumulation of wealth, they found no time to write to their old teacher. The betrayal of the younger generation, into which she had poured her whole soul, became the final bitter disappointment of her long life. The story of these women proves that a high level of culture and education does not guarantee protection from social injustice. They were hostages of an era that demanded their complete self-sacrifice without offering even minimal financial security in return. Their quiet passing in the poor neighbourhoods of London remains one of the strongest indictments of Victorian class hypocrisy. They deserved a peaceful old age surrounded by books and respect, but received only oblivion and bitter poverty. Their life's journey was one of constant deprivation, culminating in absolute social isolation. Despite all the humiliation, isolation, and poverty, it was these solitary women who shaped the intellectual character of an entire generation. They were the unseen architects of the Victorian era, laying the foundation of knowledge in the minds of those who would later rule a vast empire. Rigorous lessons in geography and history, held in cold upstairs rooms, shaped the worldview of future ministers and distinguished ladies. Without their painstaking daily labour, the aristocracy would simply have sunk into utter ignorance and idleness. They served as guardians of culture, passing on the torch of enlightenment amid the harshest social pressures and constant alienation. The system tried to break them by confining them within a rigid framework of rules and limiting their lives to the confines of the schoolroom. Yet it was precisely their ability to maintain their dignity under unbearable conditions that became an example of resilience for many young students. Girls from wealthy families saw before them the image of an independent, intelligent woman who earned her living through her own honest labor. This silent influence gradually laid the groundwork for large-scale social change and the struggle for women's rights in the future. The seeds of independence were sown in fertile ground by the very people who themselves were deprived of the most basic freedom of choice. The story of governesses is not merely a tale of social inequality. It is a testament to the incredible strength of the human spirit. They proved that it is possible to be poor while maintaining the highest standards of inner culture and moral integrity. Their diaries, letters, and memoirs constitute a unique chronicle of the era, written without embellishment or pompous historical grandstanding. Reading these documents today, we realize the enormous price they paid for the right to remain thinking individuals. Their lives were a continuous, quiet struggle for the right to be individuals in a world that recognized only money and titles. The contribution of these female workers to the development of society remained underappreciated for a long time and was overshadowed by men's achievements. Only modern research has made it possible to fully appreciate the extent of their influence on 19th century culture. They were the first professional women to pave the way for all subsequent generations of working, independent women. Their suffering and sacrifices were not in vain. They became an important milestone in the long history of emancipation and social progress. Today, we can look upon their lives with deep respect, recognizing their hidden yet absolute greatness. Their silent shadows still roam the corridors of old English mansions, serving as a reminder of the price of past grandeur. As we gaze at the stern faces in old daguerreotypes, we see in them not victims, but true heroes of their time. They won their inner battle, preserving the purity of their minds in defiance of all the laws of a cruel capitalist system. Their path was one of deprivation, but it was the path of people who did not betray the light of knowledge for the sake of momentary well-being. This is a true triumph of the human spirit over circumstances, deserving of the most detailed account. We have examined only the hidden part of the iceberg that was the Victorian era, peering behind the facades of luxurious aristocratic mansions. Behind every glittering debut of a young lady lay the invisible, grueling labor of lonely and powerless governesses. These stories show that human dignity can survive even under the harshest conditions of social and emotional isolation. Society demanded their complete self-sacrifice, offering in return neither security nor simple human compassion. Studying their authentic diaries shatters the romantic myth once and for all, leaving us face to face with a harsh but important truth. What other little-known professions from the past do you think deserve our in-depth historical investigation? Suggest topics for future videos you'd like to see on our channel in the comments, and be sure to subscribe so you don't miss new episodes.